Please join in our gathering hymn, "This Little Light of Mine." Welcome, everyone, to worship at First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon. Our mission here is to nurture the individual spirit and together work toward building the beloved community. And we are so glad that you decided to join us this morning. As we move into the holiday season, I want to remind you of our special worship services. You can join us for a service celebrating the winter solstice on December 21st at 7 p.m. On Christmas Eve, we'll gather for a family service at 4 p.m. Pacific, and then also a single evening service at 8 p.m. And our worship on December 27th will feature a rebroadcast of the Christmas pageant from last Christmas. We can't perform the pageant in person this year for obvious reasons, but we can provide at least a little pageant for the many of us who need at least some pageant in our holiday experience. We hope that you will join us as we celebrate this season. And after the service today, there will be a social hour. Just look for the QR code on the screen after the postlude. We are blessed to have a guest preacher this morning. The Reverend Abi Janamanshi is the senior minister of the Cedar Lane Unitarian Church in Bethesda, Maryland. Abi was born in India and says of his Unitarian Universalism that it makes him a better Hindu. Some may remember him from my installation when he chanted and prayed for our ministry here. I am just delighted that he's able to share a message with us this morning. And a few words about this morning's service. Unitarian Universalism draws from many theological sources, including wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. This third Unitarian Universalist source contains within itself an amazing variety of contributions from the world's religions, which enrich our faith and expand our vision. Today's service celebrates Bodhi Day, a defining event in the life of the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, when he experienced enlightenment. It is observed at this time of year by traditional Zen and Pure Land Buddhist schools in China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. Bodhi Day serves as a reminder, amid all of the hustle and the bustle of this season, to pause, to center down, and reconnect with the inner wisdom that is available to all of us, and to recognize our relation to the whole. I will light our chalice here on the chancel now. If you have a chalice or a candle, this would be a good time for you to light it. We are Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice in faith, in hope, and in love.
Dum tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum tarakita takatimi takata takatimi tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatima takata tarakita dum takatimi takatami takatimi tarakita nom tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita nom tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita nom tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dom tarakita nom takatimi takatami takatimi tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom takatimi takatami takatimi tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita takatimi takatami takatimi tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata dum tarakita dum tarakita takatimi takata tarakita dum tarakita nom tarakita takatimi takata tananum tananum tanana takatimi takata tananum tananum tanana takatimi takata tananum tananum tanana takatimi takata tarakita takatimi takata tarakita takatimi takata tarakita takatimi takata takatimi takajana takatimi da da da.
Reverend Abi will offer our call to worship, chanting in the Pali language. I will respond with the English translation after each section.
Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasse. Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasse. Namo tasse bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasse.
I pay homage to the Blessed One, the Perfected One, the fully enlightened One.
Suppatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho. Ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho. Nyapatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho. Samichipatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho. Yadidam chattari purisa yugani atta purisa puggala esa bhagavat savaka sangho ఆహునెయ్యో దక్కినెయ్యో పాహునెయ్యో అంజలీకరణీయో అనుత్తరం పుణ్యకేతం లోకస్సాతి.
The Sangha of the Gracious One's disciples are good in their practice, are upright in their practice, are systematic in their practice, are correct in their practice. That is to say, the Sangha of the Gracious One's disciples are worthy of offerings, of hospitality, of gifts, and of reverential salutation, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world.
Buddham sharanam gacchami, dhammam sharanam gacchami, sangham sharanam gacchami.
I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Sangha. I take refuge in the Dhamma. Please join now in our hymn, No Matter If You Live Now Far or Near. Please join me now in our responsive reading. It is from the Dhammapada, the sacred book of sayings of the Buddha. Let us live in joy, never hating those who hate us. Let us live in freedom, without hatred among those who hate. Let us live in joy, never falling sick like those who are sick. Let us live in freedom, without disease, even among those who are ill. Let us live in joy, never attached among those who are selfishly attached. Let us live in freedom, even among those who are bound by selfish attachments. Let us live in joy, never hoarding things among those who hoard. Let us live in growing joy like the bright gods. No disease is worse than greed, no suffering worse than selfish passion. I invite you now to join in singing our doxology, Spirit of Life. Our offerings for the month of December will be shared with 3 organizations with which we have long partnered. All of them provide direct, critical services in our community. Outside In, the Clay Street Table, and the Oregon Worker Relief Fund. Thank you for your generosity as we share our abundance in this season of great need. service when we share the joys and concerns of members of our community. You can ask to be held in prayer by our ministers and lay ministers by writing to prayer@firstunitarianportland.org. And if you have a joy or sorrow that you would like announced from the pulpit, please write to parishnconcerns@firstunitarianportland.org. Former member Everett Goodwin died on December 5th from COVID-19. Everett was 78 and lived in Pocatello, Idaho in recent years. He was a regular attender at this church during his many years in Portland. He was a poet, loved to share his work and the work of fellow writers. He was also part of our men's community. We hold Everett's family at this time of loss. We also hold all of the other families in this community and every community who are grieving the loss of so many loved ones and beloved friends to the virus. There is much loss to grieve and many lives to hold in our hearts this season. And member Warren White is recovering beautifully from receiving his long-awaited kidney transplant. He was moved to the West Hills Rehab Center and reports that his doctor says no one he's helped has recovered from a transplant as fast as has Warren. Warren would appreciate our adding our prayers to his prayers of gratitude. And we celebrate with the Reverend Joseph Boyd, who was called to the Unitarian Universalist ministry out of this congregation. Some of you will remember him. Joseph received final fellowship from the Unitarian Universalist Association this fall. That's a major milestone in a minister's career. Joseph has been serving as the contract minister in the Youngstown, Ohio Unitarian Universalist congregation, and this year accepted a call to serve that congregation as their settled ministers. We hold all of these concerns and all of the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken in our individual lives and in the life of the community around us. Will you pray with me now? Spirit of life, Spirit of love, Spirit of compassion, Buddha nature that resides within each of us. There is so much for our hearts to hold. There is a weight that we feel even in moments of happiness this season. The losses from the virus continue to mount, and despite the promise of relief that will come from the vaccines, we know there are hard months ahead. More danger for us in human contact, more isolation as we need to remain apart, more financial hardship for far too many of us and far too many of our neighbors, with movements towards support and equity tentative and uncertain at best. There is much for our hearts to hold. May we remember, as we honor and reflect on the teachings of the Buddha today, may we remember that the Buddha's wisdom began with the recognition of suffering. We are not the first called to hold such suffering in our hearts. And may we learn from the example of the Buddha and of all the Buddhas that have followed and all the bodhisattvas in our lives, those who are awakened and stay behind to point the way for us. May we discover that we can be strong enough to stay present to the suffering and still respond with compassion and loving kindness, turning our world toward love. May we, too, become awakened and remember that we are called to do only three things: love justice, be merciful to ourselves and to others, and walk humbly. There is a refuge for us in seeing as much of the truth as we can bear, and responding with hearts that may be broken, but which we can discover to our surprise, hearts that may be broken, but hearts that also have the power to heal. May that be so. And amen. Let's take a few moments together now in silence.
Bodhi Day marks the day Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha. The word Bodhi means awakening, and I'd like to explore what it means to awaken today. But first, a historical context of the Buddha's awakening is provided by some of the key events of his life. Now, the early Buddhists were not historians any more than early Christians were. Their first passion, when their teacher was no longer with them in body, was to record not what they know of his past, but what he had taught. Of the Buddha's life before enlightenment, therefore, the scriptures record only isolated fragments. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE, the son of Queen Maya and King Suddhodana, who ruled the lands of the Shakya clan along what is today the border between India and Nepal in the Himalayan kingdom of Kapilavastu. Apparently, his power was not absolute, but shared with a voting assembly called the Sangha, the same name the Buddha would later give to his monastic order, one of the earliest democratic institutions in the world. When he was born, some holy people prophesied that he would either become an emperor or renounce the world for a great spiritual destiny. To ensure his son would be a great king, King Suddhodana isolated him in his palace and ordered his ministers not to expose the boy to tragedy or allow him to lack anything he desired. Separated from the world, Siddhartha was later married to Princess Yashodhara, and they had one child, Rahula. He was 29. His future promised every fulfillment life could offer. By this time, however, gnawing questions had begun to haunt his mind. The pleasures and luxuries of palace life seemed fragile, edged with the poignancy of something not quite real enough to hold on to. Finally, desperate to ease his tormented mind, Siddhartha persuaded his father to agree to a day outside the walls of the palace. Recalling the prophecy of his son's birth, the king made sure the city was devoid of anyone poor, sick, elderly, or suffering along the prince's designated route. Yet, despite all precautions, as Siddhartha rode through the kingdom with his charioteer Channa, he saw 4 sights which stunned him deeply. First, he saw a very old person, tottering, bent over, and frail. Next, he saw a person grievously ill, cared for by his family. Then, he saw a dead body. Each time, he asked his charioteer, "To whom do these things happen?" And each time Channa replied, "To everyone, my prince." On his way home, Siddhartha encountered a 4th sight, a monk seated by the roadside with a begging bowl, deep in meditation. Siddhartha rode home deep in thought. He realized he had been asleep for 29 years. A few days later, he resolved to go forth from the life he had known, not to see his family again until he had found a way to face the sorrows of life and find a way beyond their grasp. So that night, Siddhartha left the palace life and his wife and infant son to venture out into the forest. And for the next 6 years, he wandered in the forest, subjecting his body to all kinds of mortification, including reducing his food intake to 1 grain of rice a day. However, Siddhartha discovered that with his body so worn down, he could not meditate well. He realized that these extreme practices were just another form of self-attachment, and that neither the self-gratification of palace life nor the self-mortification of asceticism were constructive. Thus, it is said, he discovered the middle path, not enlightenment per se, but a critical aspect of the path to enlightenment that avoids extremes and is therefore conducive to reaching it. Near the city of Gaya in India, he found a tranquil spot under a sacred fig tree where he sat down to meditate with a solemn vow. Come what may, let my body rot, let my bones be reduced to ashes. I will not get up from here until I have found the way beyond decay and death. Thus determined, Siddhartha passed into a deep meditation when the senses close down and concentration flows undisturbed by awareness of the outside world. Then the chronicles say, Mara, the tempter, came, much as Satan came to tempt Jesus in the desert. Mara is every selfish passion that ties us to a mortal body. Despite all the fierce temptations that Mara threw at him, lust, cowardice, doubt, hypocrisy, the desire for wealth and fame, Siddhartha continued his plunge into deeper consciousness. Finally, as he neared the frontier in consciousness that divides what is transient from the permanent, Mara challenged him in person. Who had given him the right to escape his realm? Mara asked. Siddhartha did not argue, but it is said that he placed his palm on the earth, and the earth itself gave witness. At this, Mara ordered his armies to retreat, and Siddhartha slipped into that profound stillness in which thought stops and the distinctions of a separate personality dissolve. In this profound state, he remained immersed throughout the night. When dawn came, the tree under which he sat burst into bloom, and a fragrant breeze showered him with blossoms. He was no longer Siddhartha, the finite personality, but Buddha, the awakened one. This experience provided him with the insight into the true nature of reality. Then Mara is said to have placed his last trump. You have awakened to nirvana, he whispered, and thus escaped from my realm. You have plumbed the depths of consciousness and known a joy not given even to the gods. You sought nirvana with the eyes clear and found it almost impossible to achieve. Others' eyes are covered with dust from the beginning, and they seek their own destruction. If you try to teach them what you have found, who do you think will listen? Who will strive as you have? How many will even try to wipe the dust from their eyes? The Buddha pondered this for a long time, and then replied, perhaps there will be a few who will listen. Dust does cover the eyes of all, but for some it is only a thin film. Everyone desires an end to suffering and sorrow. To those who will listen, I will teach the Dhamma, and for those who follow it, the Dhamma itself will set them free. Then, with his teaching worked out, he went forth to teach. The Buddha had not only awakened to enlightenment, he was now established in it, aware of life's unity, not only during meditation, but at every moment, awake or asleep. Now he could help others to make the same crossing. A kind of cosmic ferryman, he is represented as always calling Koi Marga, anyone for the other shore.
not the things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside. I am light. 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 I'm not the mistakes that I have made, or any of the things that caused me pain. I am not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am light. 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 I am not the color of my eyes. I am not the skin on the outside. I am not my age. I am not my race. My soul inside is all light. I am 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 divinity defined. I am the God on the inside. I am a star, a place of it all. I am light.
Historically speaking, Siddhartha awakened to enlightenment at the age of 35 and became the Buddha. But what did he awaken to? And what was the content of his awakening? In essence, he awakened to his own ignorance. He saw his ego, symbolized by Mara, for what it really was, an illusion. At the same time, he awakened to the reality of all life. In his face-to-face encounter with Mara, when Mara, the ego self, arrogantly says, "But I am your house and you live in me," the Buddha counters with, "O Lord of my own ego, you are pure illusion. You do not exist. The earth is my witness. Therefore, since the earth represents all of life, we can also say that what the Buddha awakened to was the reality of all of life. This reality of life is infinitely dynamic and constantly changing, and is symbolized by the bright aura that surrounds him after his awakening. After awakening to enlightenment, the Buddha gathered his 5 former disciples and a few others to preach his first sermon. This was the first utterance of the 4 noble truths and the path of the middle way. The 4 noble truths are the fact of suffering, that suffering has an identifiable cause, that we have the ability to end the cause, and finally, the ways to end the cause of our suffering is by following an 8-fold path, which is right understanding, right purpose, right speech, right conduct, right work, right effort, right attention, and right meditation. The Buddha said, "We are never separated from enlightenment. Even at those times when we feel most stuck, we are never alienated from the awakened state." Now, this is a radical assertion. Even ordinary people like us, you and me, with hang-ups and confusion and baggage, have this mind of enlightenment called bodhicitta. The openness and warmth of bodhicitta is in fact our true nature and condition. Even when our neurosis feels far more basic than our wisdom, even when we are feeling most confused and hopeless, bodhicitta, like the open sky, is always here, undiminished by the clouds that temporarily cover it. Now, we may find the Buddha's teaching hard to believe, yet the truth is that in the midst of all our suffering, in the hardest of times, we can contact this noble heart of bodhicitta. It is always available in pain as well as in joy. But awakening is not enough in itself. It must lead to living compassionately and practicing what His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls emotional disarmament, which he defines as the ability to see things realistically and clearly without confusion or fear or rage. If a problem has a solution, he says, we must work to find it. If it does not, we need not waste time thinking about it. Now, this is what the Buddhist middle path is all about. Inner understanding and illumination leading to self-compassion and compassion toward others and the world. So compassion is a core ethic of the Buddhist tradition. It springs from the Buddhist understanding that all life is interdependent and interconnected. Now, if we realize in our heart this essential truth, we will understand that everyone and everything are related to us. And if we look upon the suffering of one of our loved ones with this understanding in our heart, we will feel compassion. So compassion is looking at the suffering of another being and realizing that that being is our relative. It is understanding that another's suffering is also, in some sense, our own suffering. So this awareness of interdependence, the Dalai Lama says, leads to universal responsibility. He writes in a Time magazine article, the coronavirus outbreak has shown that what happens to one person can soon affect every other being. But it also reminds us that a compassionate or constructive act, whether working in hospitals or just observing social distancing, has the potential to help many. So the source of compassion is self-awakening. And awakening begins with seeing the world as it is. It begins by embracing with your mind and heart all the beautiful and terrible things that happen to all humans and all of our relatives in the world. Compassion is born out of looking with an open heart at the world's suffering. The hidden treasure and suffering, sorrows, and pains of the world, writes Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield, is compassion itself. In order to understand compassion, it is important to realize that compassion is not merely a feeling. It could easily become superficial and sentimentalized if it were, which is what we see all too often in our culture with compassion's nearly identical twin, love. But there truly is nothing sentimental or superficial about either love or compassion. They both begin as a feeling and a thought, but to be real, they must also then be translated into words and acts of loving kindness. So action is an integral part of the path of compassion. Now, it is quite easy to be compassionate when life is good, and it is easy to be compassionate towards those we love. But it is not so easy when circumstances are hard. But that is the true test of our open-heartedness that we are called to practice. For example, for the Dalai Lama, the greatest challenge to his compassion is the Chinese occupiers of Tibet. If he is to be true to this path of compassion, the Dalai Lama must feel compassion even toward the Chinese government. To an amazing extent, he has been able to feel compassion for the Chinese even as he holds them accountable for their oppressive and unjust actions. So when he talks about the Chinese leaders, he doesn't dehumanize them. He doesn't call them out as wholly evil. When I think about all the people toward whom I have the hardest time feeling compassion toward, I wonder if I can show the same kind of open-heartedness as the Dalai Lama. Well, not today, but hopefully soon. So the Dalai Lama embodies the central Buddhist path, waking up and then living with compassion for all beings. It is how Siddhartha, whom we call Buddha, lived. It is how the Bodhisattvas live. They become awake, but rather than depart the wheel of life for the release of nirvana, they stick around for a while to help other beings get further on their paths. So where does one start on this path towards self-awakening and compassion? We start with ourselves. We have to begin by treating ourselves with love and compassion. The Buddha put it quite simply. You can search the whole tenfold universe and not find a single being more worthy of love and compassion than the one seated right here, yourself. So feel compassion for this impermanent, flawed, yet also beautiful whole that is you. This self-compassion will help us all survive. Then, focus beyond yourself to your loved ones and your friends. Feel compassion for them. Then, extend your compassion toward your neighbors and for people you do not know and across the world. And then, think about what the Dalai Lama calls your apparent enemies and see if you can kindle some compassion for them. Then think about all the non-human beings your life impacts, other animals and the trees and the rocks and the air and the waters, and see if you can feel compassion toward all of them. See the whole great web of life and feel compassion for this great whole. This is what the Buddha did. This is what the Dalai Lama does. This is what you and I can do if we are truly awake. So may it be. Would you join me now in the spirit of prayer as I share this ancient blessing, Anumodana, in Pali and in English. Sabbitiyo vivajjantu, sabbarogo vinassatu, mate bhavatvantarayo, sukhi dighayuko bhava. Abhivadana silissa nityam uddhao pachayano chattaro dhamma vadanti ayuvanno sukham balam bhavatu sabbha mangalam rakkantu sabbha devata sabbha buddhanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te bhavatu sabbha mangalam Rakkantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te bhavatu sabbha mangalam rakkantu sabba devata sabba sanghanubhavena sada sotti bhavantu te Buddham sharanam gacchami Dhammam sharanam gacchami Sangham sharanam gacchami. May all distresses be averted. May every disease be destroyed. May there be no dangers for you. May you be happy and live long. For one of respectful nature who constantly honors the worthy, 4 qualities increase: long life, beauty, happiness, and strength. May there be every blessing. May the divine protect you. Through the power of all the Buddhas, may you always be well. Through the power of all the Dhammas, may you always be well. Through the power of all the Sangha, may you always be well. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the Sangha. So may it be.
I invite you now to join in singing our final hymn, Faith is a Forest. May the suffering in our world and the suffering in our lives call forth in us compassion as we discover ourselves awakening to the work before us, but also awakening to the hope that may be bruised and tested, but the hope that still persists in our hearts. May that hope too be awakened in us. As compassion calls us to action, may we hold ourselves with compassion as well, joining our solitudes in the truth of our connection, finding refuge in the Buddha and in his teaching and in this community. This is the day we have been given. Let us rejoice and be glad. Go in peace, practice love. Amen.